For almost 2 centuries, the Blueies have held on to a quiet legend tucked into the rugged bushland of Linden. A constable, a bushranger, a lonely headstone, and a cave hidden in the scrub. The story goes that in 1837, a constable named John Donohoe, stationed at a nearby stockade, was in pursuit of a bushranger known as King. Shots rang out through the bush. Donohoe fell, struck by a bullet, and King fled into the scrub, taking refuge in a cave below what's now Burke Road. Donohoe was buried close to where he died, and King, the story says, was later captured and executed. It's a tale long accepted as fact, but like many stories passed down through time, cracks begin to show when you look a little closer. Who was this bushranger King, and why doesn't his name appear in official records? Bushrangers of the era were rarely invisible. They made headlines, stirred fear, or they were the talk of the colony. Yet this man seems to exist only in retellings, echoed through old newspapers and a 1928 tourist guide. If he truly met his end at the gallows, why is there no record of it? This was a time when Cox's original road across the mountains was being reshaped and improved. By the 1830s, convict gangs carved new deviations through the landscape, labouring under harsh conditions and driven by the promise of freedom. In 1835, naturalist and missionary James Backhouse travelled this very route. In his book, Narrative of a Visit to the Australian Colonies, he paints a vivid picture of what he experienced, and you can check it out via the link in the video description. In his writings, he described iron gang camps scattered along the roadside. One such camp appears to have stood near 17 Mile Hollow, here at Linden. Around 60 men worked under the watch of a young officer, housed in rough huts and movable caravans in open clearings. Men slept on the floor, and many more on platforms built within. There were no stockades, just armed guards, strict discipline, and standing orders to shoot any man who took off for the bush. Some did run. Those bolters or absconders that did manage to escape from such camps often turned to armed robbery to survive. This may have been the case with King, who, according to this particular legend, shot Donohoe when being pursued. Maybe King was a bolter from one of the mountain road gangs, and Donohoe was one of those whose task it was to guard them. In a paper written by local historian John Lowe in 2012, a big suggestion was made. Rather than John Donohoe being a constable, he could well have been one of the convicts working on the road at 17 Mile Hollow. Then there's the Gravestone. The location of the Gravestone in Burke Road, as you can see in this photo I took back in 2020, doesn't mark the original grave. When the railway first pushed through in the late 1860s, it was moved north of the embankment within the railway fence. It was then moved again some 40 years later, when the rail line was duplicated, broken and shortened in the process, and clumsily plonked in the ground. Come 1952, and it was moved once more, where it sat for a couple of decades before the Linden Citizens Association took charge of it in the 1970s. The inscription was quite weathered, so the association re-inscribed the back of the gravestone and put it into its present location. One problem, though, the name was carved as Donohue, not Donohoe. A small mistake, perhaps, or a clue. Because there was a man, John Donohue, also recorded as Donohoe, whose story fits this place far more closely than legend might suggest. In 1818, in Tipperary, Ireland, he was convicted of an unspecified crime. A quarryman, well sinker, and labourer by trade, he was sentenced to transportation and on 7 August piled aboard the Earl St Vincent with 159 other male convicts. Their clothing was stripped from them and they were given new ones, and they were allowed to stay on deck until the setting of the watch. One convict, named William Keating, tried to escape by jumping overboard while the ship was still docked, never to be seen again. Bad weather prevented the ship from departing until the evening of the 9th, and onboard surgeon John Johnson was kept very busy tending to the many ailments of the convicts. Upon sailing up our east coast on 12 December, Johnston ordered the prisoners' irons be removed before anchoring in Sydney Cove on 16 December. Fresh provisions were issued, and the convicts were ordered to wash themselves and their clothing for the inspection and muster on the 18th. They all remained on board for 3 days and were allowed on deck every day until sunset while the ship was anchored in the harbour. The convicts were then transported to Parramatta via the river, and then by road to Windsor and Liverpool, where they were distributed among various settlers. Donohoe was sent to Windsor, where he spent a short time working as a servant, and then moved to Sydney's Hyde Park Barracks, according to the 1828 census, under government employ. His name appeared again, this time in the Sydney Gazette on the 2nd of December 1834. According to the article, he was employed as a messenger at the commissariat stores by Circular Quay in Sydney. The stores were basically an economic hub for the colony, storing food, hardware and liquor and other goods to supply convicts, soldiers and others that relied on government rations. It's here that he got into a bit of strife. Donohoe and Adam Sproul, a sergeant of the 4th King's Own Regiment, were caught stealing rum in the stores at night. Sproul was holding a candle and Donohoe was siphoning the 150-gallon cask. Both were found guilty and charged with larceny. Sproul was sentenced to transportation out of the colony for the term of his natural life. Donohoe, already in his mid-50s and of previously good character, was sentenced to 7 years working in irons on the public roads of the colony. 3 years later, in 1837, his life ended working on the mountain roads at 17 Mile Hollow. There's no record of a bushranger's bullet, no account of a violent encounter, only his name in the convict death register, stating he died aged 60, though the headstone claims 58, a small discrepancy lost in time. Was it illness, exhaustion, the slow toll of forced labour? We may never know. What we do know is that the legend of a constable slain by a bushranger may, in truth, be the story of a convict who simply died where he laboured, his memory reshaped over time into something else. And yet, even that fragile thread of truth hasn't been left untouched. In fact, it's been violated. In 2024, it was discovered that the headstone of John Donohoe, whoever he truly was, had been vandalised and stolen. After nearly 2 centuries of quiet endurance, the last physical marker of his story was taken. Why any twisted lowlife would do such a thing is beyond comprehension. What lingers at Linden isn't just the story of a bushranger and gunfire, but how easily truth can blur into legends. A life that may have ended quietly under the weight of hard labour became something more dramatic, more memorable. Now, with the headstone gone, all that remains is a question hanging in the bush, a quiet reminder of how fragile history can be when its last traces are left unguarded.